Hi, my name is Emily Marcourt, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Andy Warhol. So, who was Andy Warhol? He is best known for being a successful magazine and ad illustrator, and he became a leading artist of the 1960s pop art movement. He also took part in a variety of other art forms like performance art, filmmaking, video installations, and writing, so he wasn't just an artist. He was born Andrew Warhola on August 6th in 1928 in the neighborhood of Oakland in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His dad, Andrei Warhola, and his mother, Julia Warhola, were both Slovakian immigrants, and they immigrated from eastern Slovakia in the early 1920s. His father was a construction worker, and his mother was an embroiderer. His parents were also devout Byzantine Catholics, and they also attended Mass regularly. And his parents were able to maintain their Slovakian culture and heritage while they were living in one of the Eastern European ethnic enclaves in Pittsburgh. He was the youngest of three boys. However, his parents did have one little girl who unfortunately they lost when she was 6 months old. So Andrew grew up in an urban surroundings of a smoky industrial city during the Great Depression. And since it was the Great Depression, times were pretty difficult. So during his first 6 years of life, his family moved and lived in 5 different houses. And in the year 1934, his father had bought a 3-story yellow brick house located at 3252 Dawson Street in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh. And the two most important things that his father liked about this house was one, that it was close to a school, and the second was that it was in walking distance from a Byzantine Catholic church. His father also took liking to the fact that the house was close to the Carnegie Museum and Library, as well as the Carnegie Institute, Forbes Field, and the Schenley Theater. Now, Andy lived on Dawson Street from the year 1934 until he left for New York City in 1949. From an early age, he had showed that he had this amazing talent when it came to drawing. However, at the age of 8, he got sick and was unfortunately bedridden. He had contracted Sydenham chorea or St. Vitus dance, and it is a rare disease, but it can sometimes also be fatal. And this disease affects an individual's nervous system, and it's a movement disorder that causes the individual to have sudden, unintended, and uncontrollable jerky movements of the arms, legs, and facial muscles. So while he was sick in bed, his mother had to find something to entertain him, and she also happened to be a very talented artist. So this is the time when she gave Andrew his first drawing lesson. Now, along with his mother, his brothers would also entertain him for hours, and they taught him how to trace and print images. So drawing obviously became one of Andrew's favorite pastimes. Now, while he was bedridden, he also became an avid fan of movies. And when he was 9 years old, his mother gave him his first camera, and he decided to take up photography. And he would develop the film in a makeshift darkroom that he had made in the basement of his family's house. Andy attended Holmes Elementary School. Now, while he was in elementary school, he was also simultaneously taking free art classes at the Carnegie Institute. And in 1942, when Andy was 14 years old, his father passed away. His father had unfortunately been sick with a jaundiced liver. Now, Andy was so distraught over his father's death that he wasn't able to attend the funeral. And instead, he actually hid under his bed during his father's wake. His father really believed in him and recognized his artistic talents. And he believed in Andy so much that in his will, he dedicated his entire life savings to Andy's college fund. And later that same year is when he began high school. He attended Shenley High School and graduated at the age of 16 in the year 1945. He finished 51st in his class of 278 graduates. And one of his father's main wishes was for Andy to continue his education and attend college. So in the year 1945, he went and did just that, and he enrolled at the Carnegie Institute for Technology. And he actually almost failed his first year of college. However, a sympathetic professor gave him another chance and allowed him to enroll in summer class. Now, during this time in the summer, he also had a job helping out his older brother Paul, and their job was to huck fruit and vegetables from a truck. And when he had spare time, he would take every opportunity he had to do these quick little on-the-spot sketches of the customers. And these sketches actually helped him to be readmitted into the school, and they even earned him a scholarship. During another summer break from college, he worked at a department store, and his job there was to create the window displays. This is where he was first introduced to the world of high fashion, and it would later spark his interest as an illustrator. When he was at college, Andy became popular among his peers, and that was due to his reputation for his unique solutions. His popularity among his professors was kind of all over the place. Some of them liked him and others didn't. One of his professors, who was displeased with his nonconformity, told him that he was the last on the list to amount to anything, and another professor told him that he was the only student who had a product to sell. In the year 1949, he earned his degree in design from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. Now, after his graduation from college, him and a fellow classmate by the name of Philip Pearlstein decided to board an overnight train to New York City, where they would pursue the world of art. And Andy had moved to New York City with the hopes of starting his career as a commercial artist. And at this time is when Andy decided to drop the last A at the end of his last name, making him Andy Warhol. During college, he would occasionally drop the A from his last name, but he made it official when he signed his first commissioned piece of art as Andy Warhol. For years, there was a lot of speculation as to why he made this change, but it was simply just because it was easier to say. So he had this portfolio full of his artwork, and with this portfolio, he quickly received illustration jobs from all the major fashion magazines, including Glamour, Vogue, and Harper's Bazaar. And he later went on to accept a permanent position at Glamour magazine. He won frequent awards for his whimsical style, which consisted of him using his own bottled line technique and rubber stamps to create his own drawings. His bottled line technique and his craftsmanship caught the eye of numerous art directors. And throughout the 1950s, the advertising world prepared him well for his venture into the art world in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, Andy looked at fine art as a larger challenge. And in the year of 1960, he purchased a 4-story townhouse and started to experiment with using advertising and comic strip imagery in his art. And these early pop paintings had a loose, unfinished look to them. And over the next several months, his painting style would evolve to be more flat and graphic. Now, one constant aspect of his work was that the images were known to everyone in everyday life. And in the year 1961, he debuted the concept of pop art paintings that focused on mass-produced goods. And he continued trying different techniques and added to his portfolio of popular imagery. And in the year of 1962 is when he exhibited his famous paintings of the Campbell soup cans. And the soup cans became his primary subject of his art and gained him his greatest notoriety. And on July 9th, in the year 1962, Andy held his first major art show at the Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles. And at his art show, magazines like Time, Life, and Newsweek attended, and they all wrote articles about his work. And in that same year of 1962, Andy had discovered the silkscreen process and had found that it was the perfect method to repeat his images. And this process was an extension of the earlier print methods that he had previously utilized in his days when he was an illustrator. Now, Andy worked a lot and frequently, and he began to fill his home with many paintings, and he rented a studio to store his larger works. Some of Andy's other famous paintings are of Coca-Cola bottles, vacuum cleaners, and hamburgers. And he also painted celebrity portraits such as Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, and Mick Jagger. And Andy began to receive hundreds of commissions from celebrities for portraits of themselves. And he painted a portrait titled 8 Elvises, and it is one of the most valuable paintings of all time. Now, in the year 1963, he began to experiment with filmmaking, and Andy viewed it as another way to push his creative abilities. Now, Andy's films caused quite a stir in the art world for their unconventional boldness. And he would make these films in his studio in Midtown, New York, which was known as the Factory. And the Factory was this large warehouse that he had decided to paint silver. Now, the Factory quickly became one of New York City's premier cultural hotspots and was the scene for lavish parties attended by the wealthiest socialites and celebrities, and this is when Andy quickly realized his newfound celebrity status. And Andy became a famous figure at New York City nightclubs such as Studio 54 and Max's Kansas City. So on March 26, 1965, he attends a birthday party for Tennessee Williams, and this is where he meets Edie Sedgwick. Now, their encounter was arranged by the host of the party, a movie producer by the name of Lester Persky. He thought the two would be a good fit for each other. However, the two were two total polar opposites. Now, during this time, suspicion was growing around Andy's sexuality. There was a lot of suspicions that he was a homosexual. And these rumors came to light due to the fact that his art was often infused with homoerotic imagery and motifs. However, Edie got around it and insisted that Andy's homosexuality was just incidental. Now, there was a lot of talk and rumors about the fact that Andy was not attracted to her and that he actually didn't like her. So, to combat these rumors, Edie's method was to take her dark shoulder-length hair and chop it off and bleach it a metallic shade of blonde to match his wig in hopes to make him attracted to her. And along with bleaching her hair, she also dressed herself in the same striped boat neck shirts that had become Andy's uniform. So by the year 1965, she was the leading lady in about 10 of his movies. So in the year 1966, Andy had gone to one of the writers of the film he was directing and said that he wanted the writer to write something where Edie committed suicide. So because of everything going on, the couple only lasted about a year before deciding to break up. And even though he had a numerous amount of relationships in his life, Andy never married, and he actually claimed he remained a virgin his entire life. So in the year 1967, he went on to publish his first book titled Andy Warhol's Index. And all throughout the 1960s, Andy also managed and produced the experimental rock band, The Velvet Underground. And of course, he designed the cover for the band's first album, titled The Velvet Underground and Nico. The album was released in March of 1967, and was also recorded in 1966 while the band was being featured on Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable Multimedia Tour. And Andy created the image of the banana that can be seen on the band's debut album. And the original album cover allowed for fans to peel back the banana skin like a sticker, or as if they were actually peeling a banana, to reveal the fruit of a nude-colored banana underneath. However, the band only sold 30,000 albums in their first 5 years, even with Andy's support. In the following year of 1969, Andy was shot by Valerie Solanas, who visited the factory, and this almost ended his career. Valerie was an inspiring writer and radical feminist at the time, and she had appeared in one of his films, and she was upset with him that he would not use a script that she had written. Valerie was later arrested and pled guilty to shooting him. Andy was seriously wounded in the attack, which caused him to have to undergo several surgeries. Afterwards, he was in critical condition for several days, but he slowly made a recovery. And as a result, from the injury and of the surgeries, Andy had to wear a surgical corset for the rest of his life. And the traumatic event was a major turning point in Andy's life. So throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, the factory went on to change considerably. The factory was no longer an open and free-flowing kind of revolving door location that it had once been. And his two assistants, who played a big part in running the factory, had quit and gone on to pursue other endeavors. And filmmaking at the time was becoming less experimental and more commercial. Andy's painting had become less risk-oriented and was not making as much of an influence on the art world as it had previously did. So his primary accomplishment during this time was his reinvention of the society portrait, and this became the primary focus of his paintings. So in the year 1969, he began a magazine called The Interview, and this would go on to take up most of his time. Andy also became part of New York City's elite crowd and loved attending the gatherings with the celebrities. And when he would go to these gatherings, he would bring his camera and his tape recorder, and he would just document them. And people started to wonder why he was doing this, and this is when he stated one of his most famous quotes, which is, "In the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes." So throughout the 1970s, he went on and continued to explore other forms of media. Throughout the 1970s, he published a variety of books, like the one titled Philosophy of Andy Warhol and Exposures. And during the 1970s, he began to experiment heavily with video art, and he went on to produce more than 60 films in his career. And some of his most famous films include one titled Sleep, which is a 6-hour film of the poet Jean Journeau sleeping, and one titled Eat, which is a 15-minute film of a man eating. And during this time, Andy also took up sculpture and revisited photography. And in the 1980s, he started to work in television. Andy hosted a television show called Andy Warhol's TV and another TV show called Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes. And both of these aired on MTV. Andy also claimed to be a passionate collector all throughout his life. He said he tried to find the beauty in almost everything. And he collected a lot of everyday objects like cookie jars, toys, jewelry, watches, and antiques. And at one point, he had 175 cookie jars. And he also had collections of Native American artifacts and arcade equipment. And he even had a collection of carousel horses and had collections of artwork done by other artists. So on February 20th in the year 1987, he was hospitalized and admitted to New York Hospital, where he was sick with an infected gallbladder and later had to have it removed. The surgery proved to be successful and he seemed to be recovering just fine. However, 2 days later, he suffered complications, which resulted in him going into sudden cardiac arrest. He died in the early hours of the morning on February 22nd, 1987, at the age of 58. And his funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, where thousands of people attended. And after his death, the Warhol Foundation of the Arts was established from his estate. In the year 1994, the Warhol Museum opened up in his childhood city of Pittsburgh, and the museum houses his largest collection of work. So now I'm going to talk about Andy's diagnosis and what Andy potentially could have had. So a hoarding disorder is defined as persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their actual value. And this difficulty discarding is due to a perceived need to save items and the distress associated with discarding them. And the difficulty discarding possessions results in accumulations of possessions that congest and clutter active living areas and substantially compromises their intended use. and if these living areas become uncluttered, it is usually only because of the intervention of a third party such as friends and family. And the hoarding causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, including maintaining a safe environment for oneself and others. The hoarding is also not attributable to any other medical condition, and the hoarding is not better explained by the symptoms of another mental disorder, such as obsessions in obsessive compulsive disorder, decreased energy in major depressive disorder, delusions in schizophrenia, cognitive defects in a major neurocognitive disorder, and restricted interests in autism spectrum disorder. So hoarding often creates extremely cramped living conditions due to the stacks of clutter and leaving narrow pathways for individuals to walk through. And the countertops in an individual's home with hoarding disorder, along with their sinks, stoves, and stairways, will usually be piled or filled with stuff and clutter, leaving the individual unable to use these spaces. And when there is no more room left inside the individual's home, the clutter may spread to the outside and surrounding areas like the garage, the yard, and personal vehicles. Hoarding can range from mild to severe cases, so more mild cases may not have a significant impact on your life, while severe cases will affect your daily functioning. So it is unclear as to what actually causes a hoarding disorder, but things like genetics, brain functioning, and stressful life events are being studied as possible causes. However, there are risk factors associated with hoarding disorder, and the first one is personality. So many people who have hoarding disorder have a behavior style that includes trouble making decisions and problems with attention, organization, and problem solving. The second risk factor is family history. So if you had a family member who had a hoarding disorder, that puts you at a higher risk for also developing a hoarding disorder. The third risk factor is stressful life events. A person may develop a hoarding disorder after experiencing a stressful life event that they had difficulty coping with. So death of a loved one can lead to a hoarding disorder or possibly developing a hoarding disorder. So there are some complications involved with a hoarding disorder, and those complications are increased risk of falls, injury or being trapped by shifting or falling items, family conflicts, loneliness and social isolation, conditions that aren't clean and can be a health risk, fire hazards, poor work performance, and legal issues such as eviction. And hoarding disorder is also linked with other mental health conditions that include depression, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So Andy had a shopping problem and he would go into places like dime stores, thrift shops, and flea markets, and he would pick up anything that really caught his eye. His friends also said that he threw nothing away and said that he couldn't throw anything away even if he wanted to do it. So there were times when he wanted to throw stuff away, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And he had this persistent inability to part with anything, and his friends and family said he got upset when they even just mentioned throwing something away. They also said that he was very much a loner. He would go shopping alone and he would often sit in his apartment alone. Now, after he died, his friends and family went to clean out his apartment and they said they found the dining room was just piled with boxes. And these boxes were piled so high that you couldn't even see the fireplace. They didn't even know that the fireplace was there. And there were numerous amounts of paintings that lined the walls, and they were just propped up against the wall. They weren't being displayed, they weren't hung up or anything. They found that his table was cluttered with things like books, papers, bowls, and heaps of other projects, finished and unfinished. And every inch of the floor was covered in boxes, shopping bags, wrapped packages, and even old food, and there were thousands of dead batteries everywhere. And they found that he had saved things like partially eaten food and invitations to events, and they found that he had been hoarding dead insects as well. And his friends and family said that you had to climb over stacks of boxes to get around his apartment, so there was very little room to get around. And there were so many boxes and they were piled so high that they blocked the entrance to other rooms and they couldn't even get through. They actually had to climb over a stack of boxes to get to his bed, and when they did, they found that the TV had been piled under a bunch of wigs. And when they went through these boxes, they found things like old receipts and unpaid bills, along with junk mail and more old half-eaten food. They even found the hospital bill from when he got shot. So when Andy was alive and he was asked about these boxes, he said that they were time capsules and he even put dates on them. So what could have caused Andy's hoarding disorder? We know that he had grown up in poverty and he became ill with Sydenham chorea at a young age, and his father died when he was 13, and these all could have attributed to his diagnosis of a hoarding disorder. So here is the first page of references used. And here is the second page of references used.